Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Babsa, I invite everyone here for this public talk on caste and cinema and Ambedkar perspective. The talk would have a special focus on the recently released movie Amar Singh Chamkila. For the talk today, I feel honored to invite our revered speakers, Dr. Harish Wankhede and Dr. Satnam Singh. Dr. Harish Wankhede is an assistant professor at the Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences. His area of interest and specialization lie in political theory, public institutions, secularism, social justice, and cinema. He has also been honored with a Raman Fellowship for postdoctoral research at Stanford University, California. We also have Dr. Satnam Singh with us today. Dr. Singh is a prominent writer and intellectual and has written extensively on Bahujan leaders and the movement. He did his PhD from the Center for Historical Studies at JNU. I welcome both of our speakers to this platform today and invite them to take over the stage. So I request Dr. Harish Wankhede to begin the talk.
Thank you. Very warm Jai Bhim to all of you. And I'm very glad that this platform, Babsa's platform, to come on this platform and speak on this very important issue. And I must also congratulate Babsa leadership and the organization for this wonderful week that they have celebrated Ambedkar and Phule's birth anniversary. And campus were almost booming with Jai Bhim and Jai Phule and Jai Birsa's slogans. So it was a wonderful time. Congratulations for building such momentum and mobilization. Probably that distinction that probably Ambedkar birth anniversary made, that Babsa in JNU during that period of time, that one particular week, will mainly be doing cultural events, and UDSF and many other organizations will be dealing mainly with the academic part. So that division is very interesting. Why I'm saying this division is interesting? Why? Because the issue of culture, that how often culture has been seen, mainly the culture related to Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasis, even for that matter the Muslim, the way that particular fragment has been relegated, almost seen as a part of the local folk or little people, and therefore there is some kind of a mainstream culture which is national and should be celebrated. That division is very much there, and therefore probably unless and until we promote what they call the Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi culture as a prominent and primary culture of the people, unless and until we make that effort, probably this kind of issue will keep on suggesting that there is a division between cultures. There is something called mainstream, great culture, a civilizational value of some, whereas the others are mainly marginal, poor, little, folklores, or even for that matter, cultures related to the subaltern people. That division is crucial, and therefore, unless and until in this kind of a very important institutions like JNU, unless and until we promote a cultural alternative, that there is an alternative which is related to what they call majority of the people, and there should be a celebration of that, those icons, those values, those artifacts, those songs, that cinema should be celebrated with that kind of a rigor and confidence. That value is important, and for a very, very long time, probably within the cultural movement, these issues were almost absent, and therefore probably therefore I thought that congratulating Babsa for defining that particular arrangement, that without dealing with the cultural context, dealing with the cultural alternative, doing politics will be a dangerous thought. And therefore, more than the academic intellectual exercise, it is the speaking about cultural issues is also an important political theme. And therefore, I thought that probably when we are thinking about this very important film, I believe, Amar Singh Chamkila, this film is important in multiple ways. Of course, I like the film, and there are, of course, multiple criticisms that are also coming up about the misrecognition of a character and how certain issues should not be presented the way it has been presented. Of course, that issue is there, but probably that issue of misrepresentation is part of what you call the historical trajectory through which Dalit or Bahujan or the Adivasi characters or their representation has been done in the mainstream cultural spaces. And therefore, probably this, what you call misrepresentation, or often been seen as the relegation of certain ideas or identities on silver screen for that matter, that is part of the long historical trajectory, and we are seeing that particular part for a very long time, that there is a depiction of characters in a peculiar way, like in most of the writings that we do on Indian cinema for that matter, mainly Hindi cinema. We know that somewhere the Dalit characters often presented as a wretched being, that he is poor, passive, hardly had a capacity to emerge as a hero, and probably will continuously be under the larger gaze of the social elites. And therefore, the capacity to emerge as a hero, the possibility that he is just like any other normal protagonist, which were there in the Hindi cinema for a very long time, that possibility was absent with the Dalit character for a very long time. Like you can start with the earlier cinema called Achut Kanya, to Sujata, to the parallel cinema which kind of attempted to deal with caste question. But if when you examine the protagonist of those films, you'll find that those characters are mainly about their poverty, their victimhood, that they are hardly have the capacity to challenge the oppressed classes. Like for that matter, when you watch film like Par, Gautam Ghosh, very popular film, it got the national award at that part of time. When you watch Par or even Manthan or multiple other parallel cinema which had the caste question and a Dalit protagonist, you'll find that the major concern is about how atrocious and precarious living conditions are there, and how terrible the life and life or the whatever experiences are there vis-a-vis the Dalit person. And therefore, those concern that Dalit life is precarious, Dalit life is of continuous victimhood, that they cannot simply raise their concerns and interest, and there is no possibility of any emancipation or welfare in that kind of a feudal atmosphere. Okay, that possibility has continuously been portrayed in parallel Hindi cinema for a very long time, and therefore this possibility that a Dalit character can have heroic attributes. Why I'm saying that it is in Bombay that most of these films were released and made and produced. But when you see that Bombay is also a city where Ambedkar's political and social mobilization was witnessed, that is the city where Ambedkar contested elections, where he formed the first political party, where he established the press and circulated his newspapers, and one of the major social or political organization that Ambedkar was running was also in Bombay, and he was also part of the academic intellectual discourse in Bombay. So knowing that a person of that caliber is part of the history of that city, you'll find that when there is some kind of a examination of the city's life, you'll find that Dalit experiences and experience of a stalwart leader like Ambedkar is almost absent. Okay, that kind of a negligence, that kind of a erasure is very much visible. That though there is a Dalit presence, there is an iconic leader who is almost omnipresent in Bombay's cultural history. Without Ambedkar, you cannot write the history of that city. And therefore, the capacity of the filmmakers, the social elite filmmakers, to almost erase and neglect or somewhere not engage with such kind of a very important social historical facts that Ambedkar was present in the city. Not only Ambedkar, post Ambedkar's demise, you will also find that a movement like Dalit Panthers, they were almost everywhere, and they were making those kind of a loud revolutionary claims that they wanted to seize the city under their control. That kind of a aggressive, heroic possibility that Panthers were opening at that part of time. And when you see the 70s cinema, where the Dalit question is now erupting and making some sense, even in that cinema you'll find that this heroic nurturing of the Dalit character, which was there at the actual political and social front. They were writing, they were raising slogans, they were painting the walls of the city, they were mobilizing people against atrocities, they were doing every other political act. But when it comes to examine their presence in cinema, you will find that cinema is almost not even endorsing that such kind of a class is available in the city. Okay, the only Marathi film which I can suggest to where there is a Dalit Panthers character who is almost visible and powerful is Jabbar Patel's film called, I'm sorry to forget the name of the film. It's a Jabbar Patel's film. So that is the only film where you have what they call the Dalit hero, the as a coming from the background of the Dalit Panthers and raising Jai Bhim on screen and suggesting that fighting against caste atrocities is the major job of the students' movement. This kind of anecdotes are there, and therefore this continuous neglect, this erasure, this possibility not to look into the Dalit world, that was the convention in the Hindi cinema for a very, very long time. And therefore, probably against this misrecognition, this absence, this claim that Dalit life should be presented on screen, you will find that probably in literature, at least Hindi or Marathi literature, there is some availability and some presence. And therefore, once we acknowledge that there is this absent or misrecognition or almost erasure, the second claim appears that why not there should be a participation, and therefore probably on that particular claim we can refer Ambedkar's examination of how public life should be witnessed, and therefore probably when we argue or acknowledge that there is almost absent, the claim for representation comes up, and therefore the Ambedkarite version of cinema or cultural politics emerged from this particular aspect that the entertainment industry, cultural industry should be democratized, should be diversified, should have representation from multiple social and cultural groups, and there should be equitable participation of each and every social and cultural group in that particular milieu. That is the major claim, that no public life should be exclusively be dominated or controlled or hegemonized by certain social classes or groups. And therefore, this claim for participation, this claim that cultural life or cultural representation should be diversified, should reflect multiple social and cultural issues, and it should not be hegemonized by one particular caste and class group. That is the major Ambedkarite claim through which we try to examine how social or cultural politics take place in India. And therefore, the claim for participation is the major claim, that the mainstream cultural life should be democratized, the diversity of the nation, mainly caste diversity, should be represented, and not only in cinema, but every other aspect of cinema making, that kind of diversity should be raised. And therefore, probably a post-90s, you'll find the arrival of what they call a Dalit genre of cinema, which was not there till late 90s, and only post-globalization, post-liberalization, you'll find that some sort of representation is now coming up on screen. And again, as I said, that probably this arrival of what they call Dalit characters or Dalit theme or Dalit subject on cinema was almost a nascent time, and very young filmmakers were doing at that part of time. And though those representations were there, it was curated through the gaze and control of the social elites, like film like Arakshan for that matter, or multiple other films where you have a Dalit protagonist, like Pita. Many multiple films are there. You'll find that the Dalit characters is of course there. He is shown with that kind of a heroic credentials. He is a kind of a aggressive protagonist on screen. But when it comes to the larger reflection on the Dalit life, Dalit socio-political life, you'll find that the social elite protagonist or the social elite gaze retain its domination over the narrative and doesn't allow the Dalit character to take up the major call. And therefore, though the Dalit protagonist is there, he always remain a passive or a second fiddle in the major narrative. And that is one of the major lacuna that we have seen. And therefore, those films that are made by the Dalit Bahujan Adivasi artist, they have a different take altogether on the cinematic representation of the characters that are belonging to the Dalit Bahujan Adivasi strata. You'll find that in Pa Ranjit's film, Nagaraj Manjule's film, or Vetri Maran's film, that a kind of a distinct representation is produced, and through that a new kind of representation is coming up. Now, the question that of course there is a new genre called Dalit cinema which is now arriving, and Amar Singh Chamkila is part of that larger trajectory which we are seeing from last 2 decades, that there are films, there are songs, there are multiple other initiatives on social media through which the Dalits are now coming to the mainstream debate and suggesting that their presence is crucial, and through that diversifying or democratizing the cultural milieu. So the question that I wanted to raise, that though there is this process going on in which we can examine and also celebrate the arrival of a Dalit protagonist and their cultural, social and political themes on screen. That is very much visible now, and as I said, Chamkila or Article 13 where represent that kind of a celebration that now cinema is moving towards democratization and diversification. Now the question is that shall we be comfortable or content with this kind of a nascent and young democratization of Hindi cinema? Or we should think more on the same ground, that though there are every month or every 6 months, there is a film or a song or a theater or a play or a book which is coming up and creating a discourse that Dalits are now arriving. They are now part of the mainstream discourse. Is it a comfortable situation for us? Okay, that this kind of a larger democratization should be celebrated. That we should think that yes, now there is a space, that there are people who recognize us and make stories on us, that there is a possibility to diversify the cinema world, and there is a possibility that tomorrow there will be a substantive democratization of film industry. My personal take on this is a little passive and pessimist. I don't think that we should be very comfortable with this development, which is of course appears very positive and democratic in nature, but I still believe that it is still tokenistic and peripheral in the real sense. If you see the number of films that are made in Hindi cinema, today there are almost more than 250 films every year. And when you make a kind of some kind of a mathematics on how many films that represent a Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi concern, or even for that matter a Muslim protagonist, you'll find a handful of film every year that can be measured on that account. That till date it is just a very small tokenistic representation of Dalits and Adivasis and Bahujans on the silver screen, and therefore this kind of a peripheral tokenistic arrival should be challenged at the very beginning and suggested, and should be suggested that more than that is required. And therefore what I am trying to suggest is that more than this kind of a celebration that one film has come up, Netflix had produced that film, there are great songs, and there is some kind of a sensitivity vis-a-vis the Dalit protagonist. Apart from that, I think there is also a requirement to understand what they call the cultural economy of the film industry. That these people, the people who are producing the film, making the film, unless and until there is a democratization of the filmmakers, the industry in general, probably this kind of peripheralization of the Dalit or the Adivasi characters will always be there. And therefore, more than remaining the what they call the consumer of the cinema, which sometimes showcase you a character like Chamkila, I think there is requirement that you should understand the larger political economy through which film industry is functioning. And in that functioning, we'll find that the cinema industry is still dominated by a peculiar caste and class, and their domination hardly allow certain issues and concerns to take up center stage. And therefore, unless and until people from the Dalit social and cultural background enter into film industry, represent their concern, make their narratives, and make a independent film of their own, probably this kind of a passivity vis-a-vis the Dalit cinema will always be there. The second part probably is important, that of course that's a difficult suggestion to make, that we should also make films of our leaders and heroes and about our narratives. Of course, you all know that cinema making is such an expensive enterprise that you cannot simply enter and decide to make a film. So that is of course a task, but as a suggestion, like Tamil Nadu or in Maharashtra, there are attempts, and there is a whole generation which is now attempting to make films, and therefore that inspiration is already available. That is also the possibility that इन लोगों को बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं आया. So that possibility is almost there, that the way Tamil cinema, or for that matter Marathi cinema, or for some instance some examples of Hindi cinema, it is there, and that can inspire a new generation of filmmakers. Okay. But more than that, probably I think the cinema culture is also need some kind of a restructuring. Probably it is required that the Dalit Bahujan cinema audience also need a change. The way we see cinema, the way we engage with popular culture, I think there is a need of a critical inquiry from the audience side now. That the major consumers of cinema today are of course coming from the Dalit Bahujan background, and unless and until they develop a critical engagement with mainstream cinema today, probably the kind of cinema, the kind of popular masala cinema that we often enjoy, it will keep on bulldozing our social and political consciousness. And therefore, developing a critical audience vis-a-vis this popular cinema is must, which has not been happened for a very long time. That the way it has done in literature, that the Dalit intellectual, the Bahujan intellectual class will challenge, will reprimand the conventional writers in literature. I think a similar pattern is also required in the popular cinematic culture. That the Dalits, intellectuals, academicians, students should take up a call to reprimand the popular cinematic culture and suggest that this particular cinematic culture is Brahmanical in nature. It represents a peculiar social and class interest, and it does not belong to the social and cultural interest of the majority of the people. And therefore, those narratives which does not belong to my social or cultural context is basically alien to my values. And therefore, probably a new critical inquiry is required. Okay, and probably for a very long time. So probably the new possibility to examine a socially sensitive audience, that we will be entering into cinema hall to watch a good film, and probably that possibility shall come from the Dalit Bahujan intellectual startup. हो सकता है ये एनिमल का फैन हो. Popular culture में बहुत इंटरेस्ट है इसको. So to democratize the cinema industry, one suggestion is of course that there should be more filmmakers, that the possibility to narrate your own social experiences, your own heroic journeys, and the capacity to build an alternative narrative of heroic representation. Okay, that possibility is one. Second possibility, as I was thinking, that a critical audience, okay, an extremely powerful and critical audience coming from the Dalit Bahujan startup, okay, that audience will not only appreciate the film, but appreciate the film from a peculiar social vantage point. And through that vantage point, when we'll examine the film, it will surely alert us that this cinema is hegemonic. It represents the cultural and social and political and economic interest of a peculiar class and caste, and therefore this particular narrative is somewhere dangerous for my political consciousness. This claim is absent in the current atmosphere of how cinema should be viewed, and therefore unless and until we develop that kind of a criticality, a very significant and powerful audience that will not only watch cinema for purpose of entertainment, for some kind of a populist element, but also engage with cinema to reprimand the cinema that what concerns, interests that cinema is representing for such a long time. And therefore calling the popular cinema as an hegemonic cinema, as a cinema that consistently representing the social and caste interest of a peculiar social group. And therefore, unless and until we develop that kind of a challenging attitude towards the popular culture, probably this message will always be there that the audience is ready for that kind of a masala enterprise. And therefore, a new challenging attitude is must for building that kind of a democratization. Third, as I said, that apart from this possibility that we can also be filmmakers and storytellers, we can also become a very critical audience. I think there is also a need to restructure the overall political economy of the industry. That the industry, as I said, that which represent a peculiar interest and disallow certain people to enter and take a center stage. I think somewhere that restructuring of that overall economy is required. And how we can do that is, of course, to participate in that cultural milieu within an aggressive manner. Suggesting not only to deal with mainstream cinema, but there are multiple other modes which are now available that create some kind of an influential cultural artist today. So becoming influencers on social media, on YouTube-like platforms, on multiple other spaces that are there, that media channels, if you can exploit, probably there is a possibility that your voices will be heard in the larger mainstream discourse. And therefore, through that kind of a very critical engagement with some kind of a social and political conscience, if you deal with cinema and this cultural artifact, probably a new kind of an alternative can be generated. And that alternative can be seen as what they call an Ambedkarite Dalit perspective on cinema, on cultural industry, on cultural politics. And unless until we develop that, probably we will be celebrating across this kind of a tokenistic presence that now has been seen, that every month or every 2 months there is a film where we can see a Dalit protagonist. I think that celebration is important, crucial, but probably we need to go beyond that and think about how to democratize the social, the entertainment business or the enterprise. Thank you very much for listening to us.